1983. So I had personal interaction with him as a young man. Dr. Wires was a trailblazer, even from all the speeches here today. As President of the Senate from 1979 to 1983, he brought glamour, brought candor, he brought panache to the legislature. After 13 years of military interregnum between 1966 and 1979, the legislature had disappeared from the governance matrix in the country. It had to be resurrected. The baton fell on Dr. Joseph Wires to do so. So it behoved on him as the President of the Senate and head of that arm of government to create a legislature that was contemporary and in sync with democratic tenets worldwide. So I would say to say that he acquitted himself creditably in discharging this responsibility is for lack of words to laud the very noble efforts that led Dr. Joseph Wires played. Such a critical role in shaping and deepening the nation's democracy between 1979 and 1983. The Second Republic, coming after 13 years of military rule, was a learning curve, serious learning curve, because they didn't have any precedents at that time. And so he had to take politicians who were gifted in the act to chart the old beaten path of the nation's democracy. So Dr. Joseph Wires led that pack. And we will remember in those days, the then president, President Shagari, but they respected the legislature so much that I recall in one occasion when they came to my village that took the steps of Dr. Joseph Wires to determine how the procession went. Wires he used to move much slower than the then president. So the president had to slow down his steps to follow Dr. Joseph Wires in most instances. So he determined how the government moved at the same time. So Wires headed the legislature, performed the task with assiduous competence, and gave that arm of government a pride of place. I made the then Cross River said very proud. I was a Cross Riverian at that time before I became an Akwa Ibom son. I was very proud of the role that he played in the governance structure at the time. It is the seed of that flourishing legislature that is sowed that we are still reaping today. That's what we are still reaping today. I recall the Senate of the Second Republic and the men of timber and caliber, in fact, men of caterpillar in those days, who were members of that hallowed chamber. I recall the late Dr. Olushora Saraki, who was the leader of the House. I recall the late Victor Akan, who was more or less like the financier of all the political structure of the then NPN, National Party of Nigeria. I recall the late Donald Etiebed, who was like a boy to let Dr. Joseph Wires, and he rewarded him with the governorship of Cross River State, though it lasted for just 3 months before the military came again. But I recall also the late national chairman of the party. In fact, if you went to any occasion and you not taste his wine made in Paris, it means you were not in that function. So those were the men. There was one sticking point about all of them. They were all patriots and they were all nationalists. And like my friend, my brother pointed out, there was no need for EFCC or anything because they ran the country selflessly and sacrificially. So there was no point setting up a corruption agency to run after them. I do hope now that we are doing the same, that there will not be any need for the corruption agency to exist any longer. So I must say that late Dr. Joe Wires was a believer in one Nigeria. He was quoted to have said, and I want to quote, that the country needs to remain one to achieve its long-term goals. The federation is something that God has given to this country and should be maintained and kept at all costs, unquote. That was late Dr. Joseph Wires. His commitment to the unity of the nation was public knowledge. It was why he is also quoted to have said, keeping Nigeria united is very painful but resourceful. Keeping Nigeria united is very painful but resourceful. Here, growth is important. These were public statements that gave effect to his belief in the oneness of this country, Nigeria. As a pan-Nigerian that he was, the late Dr. Joseph Wires could speak almost all the languages in the country. He was able to speak Igbo and understood it perfectly. He spoke the Hausa language and understood it perfectly. He spoke Yoruba and understood it perfectly, and with clinical efficiency at all times. His interest in learning, appreciating, understanding, and adapting to situations, and particularly different languages of different ethnic groups in the country for communication testified to the love he had for the country despite its diversity. He was always at home in any part of Nigeria that he visited. Today, the 10th Senate of the Federal Republic of Nigeria stands in solidarity to bid farewell to this quintessential politician, a patriotic Nigerian, a nationalist of the deepest dye. At 80, the elder statesman was a national asset, and his demise is a colossal, very collateral loss to our dear nation. But I'm, however, consoled that he lived a fulfilled life and bequeathed a legacy that shall continue to inspire generations. My prayer to the family is that the years he did not live, may God Almighty add those years to yours. And I must also say that it's never late because Dr. Joseph Wires wanted a son of the soil of Niger Delta to become a Senate president before his final burial obsequies. And on this note, I must say adieu, my predecessor. May your soul rest in perfect peace. Can we rise for a minute silence? The great soul of the late Dr. Joseph Wires, former president of the Nigerian Senate, rest in perfect peace. Prayer 1 has been taken. Prayer 2 has been done because we are already there, the burial ceremonies. Those in support of prayer 2, that we all move to Calabar to continue further deliberations. The night of tribute, say aye. Those again say nay. The ayes have it. Prayer 3, sending a condolence letter had already been carried out. to the family, good people of his constituency and the government of Cross River State. We had also indeed paid a condolence visit to the governor. And those in support of prayer 3 as performed say aye, and those against say nay. The ayes have it. Leader of the Senate, so that we don't step out and come back. As we step out now with the family to formally pay respects to the body of our late Senate President, stand at the gallery. This Senate stands adjourned to Tuesday, the 3rd day of December 2023 at 11 a.m. prompt.